Sir, I'm going to need you to step back from the counter. Ma'am, I already stepped back. Twice. I'm just trying to hand you the slip. You wrote $5 million on this. On a torn scrap of paper. In pencil. With respect, that's not how this bank works. Then maybe call somebody. Anybody. A Callum gets security, this gentleman is not. Oh my goodness, Mr. Vale. Mr. Vale. Sir, I didn't. I had no. Miss Briggs, it's all right. Let the young man finish what he was saying. He walked into Piedmont Trust and Savings on a Tuesday morning in a work shirt with grease on the cuff. 52 years old, boots worn soft, a folded paper slipped in his hand. He'd waited in line for 19 minutes and said, "Good morning, ma'am," to a teller who did not say it back. The lobby had the smell of cold marble and old money. Every eye in it slid off him. They looked at his shirt and saw a man in the wrong room. Nobody knew the deposit was real. Nobody knew whose name was on the building next door, with 3 floors of the bank's own back office in it. Nobody knew that the quiet black man with grease on his cuff had made the trip that morning as a favor to a woman who had once counted pennies out of a coffee tin so his family wouldn't lose their house. They laughed at his slip. 20 minutes later, the regional vice president came running through the lobby with her heels in her hand, calling him boss. And what happened after that, you'll want to hear. To understand why a regional vice president would run through a marble lobby in stocking feet, calling a black man in a grease-stained work shirt boss. To understand why a $5 million deposit slip written in pencil on the torn back of a hardware receipt was the truest, most exact piece of paper in that entire building. We have to go back before the marble, back before the whispers, back to a small brick house on the far edge of a town called Millwood, and to a great aunt named Miss Josephine Lattimore, and to a boy named Marcus who learned, before he learned much else, that a person's worth cannot be read off their clothes. Let's begin. Millwood was one of those towns the highway forgot around 1985 and never came back for. 1 traffic light, 2 churches, a shuttered mill down at the low end of Main Street with its windows knocked out, and up at the top end a small brick branch of Piedmont Trust and Savings that had been standing there since before the mill closed. Marcus Vale was born on a rainy November night in a 2-bedroom rental with a wood stove and a leaking porch, the only child of Kendrick and Loretta Vale. His father was a mechanic. That's the plainest way to put it, and Kendrick would have said it exactly that way himself. He worked in a 2-bay garage on Route 9, hands permanently stained with grease that no soap fully lifted, and he could listen to an engine turn over and tell you within a minute what was wrong with it. Kendrick Vale had a low voice, big hands, and a rule about work he passed to his sons, so often it wore a groove in Marcus's memory. "Son, there is no dishonor in a stained shirt. The only shame is a lazy shirt. If your shirt is dirty because you worked, you walk into any room in the world with your head high. You hear me? Yes, sir. Any room." Marcus grew up in that garage. Weekends he'd sit on an overturned bucket with a spare wrench too heavy for him, handing tools up and learning the names as he went. By 10 he could change oil. By 12 he could set points. By 15 he could pull a whole transmission with his father's guidance and a lot of skinned knuckles. The garage smelled of hot metal, cold concrete, coffee left too long in the pot, and, always, underneath everything, the sharp, clean bite of gasoline. It was the smell of his childhood, and it lived in him for the rest of his life. Kendrick did not talk much while he worked, but the little he said, Marcus wrote on the inside of his brain like a book. "Never charge for a thing you didn't do, son. Never overcharge a woman because you assume she doesn't know cars. Half of them know more than the men who bring 'em in. And if a customer can't pay today and they've been honest with you, you find a way. Half now, half next month, even quarter now, rest whenever, because a man remembers who was fair with him when it was hard. And that memory one day comes back to you as work. Marcus watched his father live. He watched customers come back for 20 years because Kendrick Vale had once fixed a starter for half price during a bad summer and had never once mentioned it again. He watched a whole small business run itself on the currency of a man's word. His mother, Loretta, cleaned motel rooms up in Aiken twice a week, an hour's drive each way. And she came home dead on her feet, with lemon oil and bleach in the creases of her hands. She never once complained. Loretta Vale was a small woman with a quiet iron faith, and Marcus grew up watching her fold ones and fives into a coffee tin on top of the icebox, saving toward a house of their own. A real one, not rented, with a porch that didn't leak. Some months there was extra to fold. Most months there wasn't. Marcus learned counting on that tin. Every Sunday night, Loretta would let him climb up onto a chair and count what was in it, and mark the number in a small green notebook. Some Sundays the number went up by $12, some Sundays by $3. One Sunday it went down by $7. Because his father had needed a part, and the tin had been the only place to reach. Marcus, 7 years old, had asked his mother if the tin was going to be sad about the $7. Loretta had laughed a real laugh, the one she only had for her boy, and pulled him against her and said, "Baby, the tin's not sad. The tin's a friend. Friends give you a little back when you need it. That's what friends are." He never forgot that either. And then, when Marcus was 10 years old, the year of the bad drought and the bad prices and the bad luck all rolling in at once, the family fell behind on the rent. 2 months. 3. The landlord was a red-faced man from up the valley who didn't want to hear about drought. And one October morning he came to the porch with an eviction paper in his hand and something like satisfaction in his face. And Marcus, hiding around the corner of the kitchen doorway, watched his father, his big, steady, tool-belted father, go quiet in a way that scared him worse than any yelling. Kendrick Vale did not beg. Kendrick Vale never begged. He said, "Give me 1 week," in a voice that didn't shake, and the landlord said something ugly about people like them, and left. And the eviction paper stayed on the kitchen table for the rest of that terrible afternoon like a wound. Marcus never forgot it. Never. That was the day Miss Josephine's Lattimore walked into his life. Miss Jo was Loretta's great-aunt on her mother's side, 70 years old, sharp as a needle, and the head teller at the Millwood branch of Piedmont Trust and Savings, the same small brick branch up at the top of Maine. She was technically family. But Loretta had been raised too proud to lean on relatives, and Kendrick been raised too proud to be leaned toward, and so Miss Jo and the Vales had a warm, distant relationship that consisted mostly of nods at church and cornbread at Easter, until the eviction paper. Loretta broke down and drove up to the bank in tears the next day, and Miss Jo, small, straight-backed, immaculate in her one good work blouse, took her niece into the tiny back office, closed the door, put a cup of instant coffee in her hands, and listened. Loretta talked for almost an hour. About the eviction paper, about Kendrick's face, about the way Marcus had been quiet at supper for a week, about the way she had, that morning, put her wedding ring in a paper envelope and drove up to Aiken and stood outside a pawn shop for 20 minutes before she'd gotten back in her car, unable to go through with it. She said all of it. And Miss Jo did not interrupt, did not gasp, did not say, "Oh, baby," or "Oh, honey," or any of the small phrases that people say when they want you to know they are moved but don't want to actually help. Miss Jo just sat there in her one good blouse and listened. That was her whole gift. She listened like it was work. She did not offer a loan. She would have offered one, and it would have been refused. she did something better and quieter and older than alone. She reached down and pulled out a battered blue coffee tin from under her desk. A tin Marcus would later learn had been under that desk for 20 years. The private trouble tin she kept for reasons only she knew, and she opened it and she counted out enough to cover 3 months of rent, and she folded it into an envelope, and she pressed it into her niece's hands. She counted it slowly, she counted it kindly. Bills laid flat on the desk between them, one at a time, so Loretta could see every one of them. Miss Joe's fingers moved with the practiced rhythm of a woman who had counted a great many other people's dollars for a great many years, and had counted every last one of them like it mattered, which it did. "This is not a loan, Loretta," she said. "This is not charity. This is family. Family means when the water is high, we all get on the same boat. You take this to that ugly man, and you tell him he can put his eviction paper back where he found it. And then, when you get home, you tell Kendrick, you tell that proud man of yours, that this was mine to give and there is no debt, and there will be no talking about it again." Loretta cried into her aunt's shoulder for a full minute in that little back office. Miss Joe did not tell her to stop. Miss Joe did not tell her it would be all right. Miss Joe held her until she was ready to stand up, and then she straightened Loretta's collar with the same fingers that had counted out the envelope, and she said quietly, "Go on, baby. Go be a mother. That's the whole of the miracle." And Marcus grew up hearing about it in whispers. Miss Joe's coffee tin, Miss Joe's envelope. In the winter, the Vales stayed in their house because a small old woman at a bank window opened a tin and counted them out safely. But there's a piece of the story that Miss Joe did not tell anyone. She told Marcus once, 10 years later when he was 20, and about to go off to a school he had no business being able to afford, and she wanted to give him some advice for the world. "Baby," she said, they were on her tiny front porch, sipping sweet tea in the summer heat. "The day I opened that tin for your mama, I was not one bit richer than she was. That tin was every dollar I had put away for my own funeral, and don't you tell her that, ever." She reached over and tapped his knee, hard, with one finger. "But I want you to remember 2 things. Are you listening?"
"Yes, ma'am."
1. Money is not the point. Money is just what a person spends the point with. You watch how a person handles money, and you'll see who they really are, faster than any Sunday sermon. She tapped his knee again. "And 2, this is the important one. Every dollar you will ever handle in your whole life has been through somebody else's hands first. Somebody with a story you don't know. You count it kind, Marcus, whatever it is, $1, $1,000,000. You count it kind, and you speak to the person handing it to you like they are a whole person. Because they are. Money remembers who counted it kind. It comes back to those folks. It always does." Marcus was 20 years old, and he thought he knew a lot of things, but he tucked those 2 sentences away, because they came from the woman who had once opened a tin and counted his family into staying alive. He would remember them again, 32 years later, in a marble lobby at a teller window, with a torn slip in his pocket and a young woman rolling her eyes at him. But that comes later. Marcus's own life ran its own long, quiet road. His father drilled discipline into him in that 2-bay garage year after year, and by the time Marcus was 17, he could keep the books for a small business as well as fix its trucks. Kendrick was proud of his boy in the low, wordless way of men of his generation. He'd never said the words, "I'm proud of you." He had, however, taken Marcus to a diner on his 16th birthday and bought him a cheeseburger and looked across the table and said, "You're a good young man. I did all right." Marcus knew what that meant. He carried it his whole life. His father died at 59, a heart attack in the garage, mid-sentence, ratchet still in his hand. Marcus, home from college for the summer, got there in 11 minutes. His father was already gone. Marcus knelt on the concrete floor beside him in the smell of oil and cold metal, and he closed his father's eyes, and he said the only thing he could think to say. "You did all right, Daddy. You did all right. I got it from here." He was 19. He kept his father's garage running for 2 years. Then, on Miss Joe's stubborn insistence, he went back and finished his degree. Business, of all things, because he couldn't stand to see the numbers that ran a small shop go on, being kept the way most small shops kept them, on the back of envelopes and in the head of the owner. He was good at numbers. He was good at people. He was good at seeing what was broken and fixing it. Whether it was an engine or a spreadsheet or a payroll that had been off by 3 cents a week for a decade, he got into fleet maintenance. Not glamorous. Just steady work, keeping other people's trucks and vans on the road. He started with 3 bays and 1 loan. He hired his father's old apprentice. He treated every driver who came in like they were somebody, because they were. He kept his shirt collar clean and his cuffs stained. The shirt collar was for the customer, and the cuffs were for the work. And he wanted everyone who came through his shop to know both were there. 15 years of that. 20. Slow, honest growth. He bought a 2nd location, then a 3rd, then 11. He kept his prices fair. He kept his word. He hired hard-working people other companies wouldn't hire, ex-cons and single mothers and old men nobody else wanted, and he trained them right and paid them decently. And most of them stayed with him for the rest of their working lives. And somewhere along the way, Marcus himself couldn't have told you exactly when, because he had never been chasing it. Vale Fleet Services became one of the biggest privately held fleet maintenance companies in the state. Contracts with regional grocery chains, with school districts, with a whole ambulance network. 60 locations, 900 employees. The kind of money that shows up on other people's spreadsheets in wide columns. And the whole time, Marcus Vale kept turning a wrench. Not because he had to, because he liked to. Because his father's rule about a stained shirt sat on his shoulder still. And because you cannot lead a company of grease-stained people from behind a clean desk in a corner office and expect them to trust you. So every Wednesday, without fail, no matter what the calendar said, Marcus Vale drove out to one of his 60 shops, put on a coverall, and spent the day under a truck with his people, and when he came out he had grease on his cuffs and his neck and, sometimes, on his forehead where he'd wiped his brow. That was who he was on the Tuesday morning of this story, because Miss Josephine Lattimore, 91 years old now, retired for a decade from the little branch on Main Street, had asked him a favor. Miss Joe had inherited, late in life, a small piece of land on the edge of town that her long-dead brother had held onto for reasons no one could quite remember. It wasn't much, 30 acres of scrub and old pasture. But a highway came through last year, and a developer came knocking last month, and Miss Joe, 91 and tired, had told him a number and been shocked when he agreed to it. She had walked out of the closing that Monday with a cashier's check for $5 million in her purse. $5 million. And she had come home to her little house in Millwood, and she had sat with it, and thought, and prayed on it, and then she'd called Marcus. "Baby," she'd said in the phone voice of an old woman, "I can't put this in the little branch here. Callum will faint, and I can't drive downtown to the big branch on my knees the way they are." A soft laugh. "Would you take this old lady's check into the main branch for me and put it in my account and get me a proper receipt? I've been a customer of that bank for 52 years. I want it done right, and I trust you. Miss Joe, I'll take the whole day off. I'll drive you myself. You'll do no such thing. You'll go your regular way and stop in at the bank and hand them the paper and take the receipt and bring it to me for supper. That's all. And you'll wear whatever you wear. Miss Joe, whatever you wear. She was 91 years old, and she had once opened a coffee tin for his mother. Marcus went on his regular route that morning. Tuesday, not Wednesday. He'd shifted his week for her. And after 4 hours already in a shop out in the county, rebuilding a fuel pump on a school bus, he drove into the city and pulled up in front of the marble headquarters of Piedmont Trust and Savings. In a work shirt with grease on the cuff, with a folded cashier's check in his shirt pocket, and in his other pocket, a torn deposit slip Miss Joe had scribbled out for him on the back of a hardware receipt because they'll ask, baby, and I want it to be in my own handwriting. He was tired. He had not eaten. He was hungry and grease-stained and thinking about his 91-year-old great-aunt sitting on her porch waiting on him. He was, in every way that mattered, exactly the man his father raised him to be. He just wasn't the man Callum Reeve at Window 4 was expecting to see stop for a second and put yourself in that grease-stained shirt. You've worked your whole life. You're doing a kindness for a 91-year-old woman. You've said good morning to every single person in that line. And now a young teller is looking through you like you don't exist, like your money can't be real, like you can't be real. Do you snap? Or do you hold your dignity and wait? Hold your answer. Because what Marcus does next surprised even him. Callum Reeve was 26 years old, and he had been at Window 4 for 2 years, and he had come to think of Piedmont Trust and Savings as his bank, the way small people come to think of any building that gives them a badge. He'd gone to a nice enough college. His parents lived in a nice enough part of town. He had learned somewhere along the way to read a customer the way you read a menu, and to decide, within about 4 seconds of them stepping to his window, how much time they were worth. Old white couple with a trust portfolio? All the time in the world. Young mother with a torn check? Sighs and eye rolls. And a black man in a grease-stained work shirt with dirt under his nails? Callum Reeve had a whole script for that. He watched Marcus wait in the line. He watched him say good morning to the woman behind him. He watched him hold the door for a man on a walker. And Callum Reeve, watching, decided that this was going to be one of those days. Next, he said, without looking up, Marcus stepped forward, quiet, mild. "Good morning, sir." "What can I do for you?" Marcus laid the folded cashier's check on the marble counter, and beside it, the torn deposit slip, a strip of receipt paper from the hardware store on Church Street, with Miss Josephine Lattimore's account number and deposit. 5,000 written across it in her careful old lady penmanship in pencil. Callum's eyes went to the slip. His mouth did a small ugly thing at the corner. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back from the counter." "I'm sorry?" "Step back. I need to. This is a torn piece of paper, in pencil, with $5 million written on it." He said the number the way you'd say a make-believe word. "That's not how this bank works, sir. It's my great-aunt's account," Marcus said, patient, keeping his voice even the way his father had taught him to keep it, even when he was cold and stiff on a January curb changing a customer's tire. "This is a cashier's check, right here. The slip is in her handwriting, so you'd know she authorized the deposit. She's 91. She asked me to bring it in for her." Callum did not touch the check. Callum did not look at the check. "Your great-aunt," he said, and there was a small performance in his voice now, loud enough that the woman at window 3 glanced over. "Your great-aunt is going to deposit $5 million, and she sent you." "Yes, sir, on a torn piece of paper. That's her handwriting, sir, with a cashier's check for $5 million. Callum leaned back a little, and now the small performance had turned into a full one, staged for the whole line. "Sir, with all respect, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I have 3 actual customers waiting behind you, and I'm not going to entertain this. Do you have any ID that connects you to this account?" "I'm not on her account. I'm delivering her deposit, Then I can't help you." Callum flicked his hand at the check the way you'd flick a bug. "Take it back to whoever you got it from. Better yet, you know what? Let me get security." "Sir, would you please step back?" The woman with the baby, 2 spots back in the line, had gone still. The old man on the walker had a look on his face like he'd seen this movie before and remembered how it ended. And Marcus Vale, a man who had, in his 52 years, been treated exactly like this in exactly this kind of room more times than he could count, did not raise his voice. He did not even sigh. He waited. He was thinking calmly about Miss Jo, her porch, the chair with the flat cushion, the plate of ribs he'd promised to bring by supper. He was going to keep his promise. He was going to keep every promise he had made this morning, including the promise, unspoken in his father's rule about a stained shirt, that he would walk into any room in the world with his head high, and he would not lose himself in it, no matter what a small man in a rented tie decided to do. That's when the woman at window 3 said very quietly, "Callum. Callum, look at the check." Because the woman at window 3 had looked at it. It was a cashier's check from a title company. It had a routing number Piedmont recognized. It was real. Callum did not look at the check. "Ma'am, please, I've got this." He hit a button under his counter. To Marcus, louder, so the whole marble lobby could hear. "Sir, I'm asking you one more time to step back from my window. Callum, get security. This gentleman is not." And that is when the door of the back office banged open, hard, and a woman in a cream-colored suit came running through the lobby. And something in her voice cracked across that marble hall like a whip. "Stop right there. Stop, 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 stop." Yolanda Briggs, Regional Vice President of Piedmont Trust and Savings, 48 years old, 23 years at that bank, had come out of her office in her stocking feet, her heels clutched in one hand, running. She had been in a video conference with 3 colleagues at headquarters. She had noticed, over the shoulder of one of them, a face on a lobby camera she recognized instantly and had never, in her worst nightmares, expected to see standing in her lobby unannounced. She had said out loud, "Oh God," and left the meeting on the screen and left her shoes under her desk and ran. She skidded to a stop 3 feet from window 4. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the slip on the counter. She looked at Callum Reeve and her face, a face that had spent 23 years being the calm center of every crisis in this branch, went perfectly, dangerously still. "Callum," she said quietly, in a voice that was carrying anyway. "What is happening at this window?" Callum was still not looking at the check. "Yolanda, this gentleman is Miss Briggs. Right now, what is happening?" I was his slip, Miss Briggs. It's 5 million on a torn Marcus. Miss Briggs turned to Marcus. She got hold of herself. She managed, somehow, a professional smile. "Mr. Vale, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I did not know you were coming in today. I would have, please forgive me. Would you follow me? I have a room. I have, please." Marcus, who had waited 19 minutes in that line and watched a young man refuse to look at his paperwork 3 separate times, looked at Miss Briggs with an expression that was, and this is important, not angry. It was tiring. "Miss Briggs," he said quietly, "it's all right. Let the young man finish what he was saying." Callum Reeve went the color of old paper because the pieces had begun, in the last 5 seconds, to arrive. The regional vice president was calling this man Mr. Vale. The regional vice president was running through the lobby without her shoes. The regional vice president had said the name Vale the way you say a name that appears on the top of a building somewhere. Vale, Callum whispered. Vale as in, Vale Fleet as in the man whose company holds the maintenance contract on every vehicle this bank owns from here to the state line, Miss Briggs said, without ever taking her eyes off Marcus. As in a personal friend of our chief operating officer, as in the man who has 3 floors of the back office building next door with his name on the sublease. Her voice was very controlled. As in the man whose great-aunt has been a customer of this branch for 52 years. Now would you please look at the check? Callum looked, at last, at the check. Then he sat down at his stool. Because his knees would not hold him up anymore, Miss Briggs got Marcus into her office. She made him sit. She would have made him coffee if he'd let her, and probably would have run out and gotten it herself in her stocking feet. Marcus, quiet, tired, waved off all of it. He set the check on her desk. He set the pencil slip beside it, unfolded, the little torn receipt with a 91-year-old woman's shaky, careful writing. Miss Briggs, he said, I'm not here to make a fuss. Miss Joe asked me to bring this in. I don't want anybody fired on my account. I don't want a scene. I just want her deposit made and a proper receipt, and I want to get back to my aunt's porch by supper. Miss Briggs, whose eyes were welling for reasons Marcus was too gracious to comment on, nodded. Mr. Vale, that check will be posted in the next 4 minutes. You will have the receipt in 5. On behalf of Piedmont Trust and Savings, I want you to hear me say this before I say anything else. I am deeply sorry. What just happened at that window was not the bank we try to be. I know, Marcus said gently. I know it isn't. Callum's 26 years old and he made a mistake. He is not the whole bank. Miss Briggs looked at him for a long moment. You are exactly the man everybody said you were, Mr. Vale. The receipt came. The deposit was posted. It was the largest single deposit that particular branch had processed in 11 years, and it was made in the end in less than 4 minutes, without any drama at all, into the account of one Josephine Cordelia Lattimore, age 91, holder of 4871 Dias, 9 since 1972. But Marcus, before he left, asked for one more thing. Miss Briggs, he said, may I go back out to the lobby for a minute? There's something I need to say. She nodded, uncertain. He walked back out. The line was still there. The woman with the baby, the man on the walker, the 2 teenagers who'd been in the middle of it all, and at window 4, Callum Reeve, who had not risen from his stool since he sat down, and who now watched Marcus Vale walk toward him the way a man watches whether he cannot escape. Marcus stopped at the window. He did not lean over it. He did not raise his voice. Son, he said, quiet, mild, look at me for a second. Callum, wretched, looked. I want you to hear this from me before your boss says it. I'm not asking anyone to fire you. I'm not going to tell them to. That's their call, not mine. But I want to tell you something my great-aunt told me a long time ago, and I want you to think about it every time you sit at that window from now on. Marcus tapped the marble counter once, gently. Every dollar you handle at this window has been through somebody else's hands first. Somebody with a story you don't know. You count it, kind son, whatever the number is. A 10, 100, a 5 million. You speak to the person handing it you like they are a whole person, because they are. He paused. Money remembers who counted it, kind. It comes back to those folks. Not always the way you think, but it does. Callum Reeve's eyes filled up. Yes, sir, he whispered. All right, Marcus said. Have a good rest of your day. And he turned to leave. The whole line applauded Callum Reeve was not fired. Marcus made sure of it. When Miss Briggs called him that evening asking for permission, half apology, half formality, to let the young man go, Marcus said no. He said, with the patience of a man who'd once been a 19-year-old kneeling on a garage floor, closing his father's eyes, that people are allowed to be young and wrong, but they are also allowed to grow, and that firing Callum wouldn't do a thing except let the bank feel better about itself. What did happen was quieter. Callum Reeve was reassigned, not to another window. He was placed, at Marcus's suggestion, into a new customer experience training program. The bank quietly stood up in the following months, one whose whole curriculum was the simple, unfashionable idea that every single customer at every single window in every single branch was a whole person with a story you did not know and was to be treated as such. Callum did not run that program. Callum was its first student. It was, in a way that made Miss Briggs smile whenever she thought about it, its most successful graduate. 2 years later, he was a branch manager in a smaller town. And the people in that town, old and young, in work shirts and in suits, would tell you that Callum Reeve treated everybody the same, and that the same was, at his window, unusually warm. Miss Briggs' own career took a jump that had nothing to do with the incident, and everything to do with the fact that her chief operating officer, who had watched a lobby video the next morning, called her personally and said, "You ran through a lobby in your stocking feet to protect this bank's honor. That is exactly what leaders do." 6 months later, she was managing 3 regions instead of 1. But the part that mattered, the part that made this a warm story instead of just a satisfying one, happened up at the top of Main Street in Millwood, on a porch, that evening, right on schedule. Marcus drove up in his old truck at 6:10, carrying a foil-wrapped plate of ribs he'd picked up from the barbecue place Miss Jo liked. He climbed her 3 porch steps. He set the receipt from the bank on the little wicker table beside her chair, next to her sweet tea. Miss Josephine Lattimore, 91 years old, in her house dress, put on her reading glasses and read the receipt. Then she looked over the top of them at her great-nephew, who was already smiling, because he knew that look. "Did they give you trouble at the window, baby?" "Miss Jo, don't you worry about it. Marcus Vale, look at me. Did they give you trouble at the window?" "A little, ma'am." Miss Jo folded the receipt precisely and set it beside her tea. Then she reached over, took her great-nephew's grease-cuffed hand in her small, thin one, and squeezed. "Baby," she said, "you did what your daddy would have done. You held your temper. You spoke kind. You brought your old aunt her receipt." A small, tired smile. "And I bet you told that young fella something on your way out, didn't you?" "Yes, ma'am, I did. I bet you did." "Miss Jo, I told him what you told me. About counting kind. About every dollar being through somebody else's hands. I don't know if it took. But I told him." Miss Jo's eyes filled up just a little. She looked away toward the far end of Main Street, where the light was starting to slant. "Baby," she said softer, "whether it took or not is not your job. Your job was to say it. That's how a sentence like that lives. 150 years now in our family. Somebody says it to somebody. Somebody plants it. Somebody else waters it. You never see the whole harvest. You just do your part." She squeezed his hand again. "You did your part, Marcus. Your daddy is proud tonight. I feel it. My sister is proud tonight." A small, mischievous smile came onto her face. "And I am proud of my grandnephew, who I told to wear whatever he wore, because I wanted to see what these fools would do." Marcus laughed, startled, and then he laughed harder. And Miss Jo laughed with him, her real laugh, the one that came out of somewhere older than her body. And the two of them sat there on the porch and laughed until Marcus had to wipe his eyes on the grease-stained cuff of his own shirt. They ate ribs on the porch. Marcus told her the whole story. The pencil slip, the stopped video call, the running vice president in her stocking feet. Miss Jo laughed till her eyes watered, Then she went quiet. "Marcus," she said, "I have been thinking. I got a good sum of money now, and an old woman does not need it. She surely does not need a funeral fund anymore. Too many of you children would fight over who got to pay for it." A gentle smile. "So here is what I would like to do. I would like to open a scholarship at the little college down in Aiken, in your daddy's name, Kendrick Vale, for young folks going into the trades, mechanics, welders, carpenters, the kind of children who work with their hands and get told, over and over, that they're not smart because their shirts get dirty." Her voice sharpened. "I want to fund every one of them I can, and I want you to help me run it." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and his own eyes filled. "Miss Joe," he managed. "Yes, ma'am?" "Yes." The Kendrick Vale Scholarship for the Trades was quietly announced at that little college the following spring. It funded 30 students year and every year after, and Piedmont Trust and Savings, perhaps not entirely by coincidence, became its principal corporate sponsor. An arrangement Miss Briggs pushed through in one afternoon, without a single meeting. The first scholarship went to a 19-year-old kid from 2 counties over who wanted to be a diesel mechanic. His father had died on him the year before. He came up to receive it in a cheap suit, and when he shook Marcus Vale's hand at the little ceremony, Marcus felt, for 1 second, his own father's hand under his palm and had to look away. "You gonna do all right, son?" Marcus asked him. "Yes, sir. I'm gonna do all right. I bet you are." Marcus Vale drove back to Millwood that night in his old truck, and he pulled up in front of a small brick house. And he sat on a porch with a 91-year-old woman who had once opened a coffee tin to save his family, and he watched the light go slow and gold across the far end of Main Street. "Miss Joe," he said finally, "you were right, you know, about counting kinds. Baby, I was mostly right about everything." He laughed. She squeezed his hand. The fireflies came up out of the yard, one after another, small and steady, like a lot of small kindnesses lighting each other in the dark. "So here's what I want you to sit with." They looked at a grease-stained shirt and decided on the whole man. They looked at a torn slip and decided on the whole deposit. And they were wrong about every single thing that mattered. How many Marcus Vales walk past a counter in this country every single day and get looked through? How many times have you been the one who decided too fast? If this story landed with you, do 3 things right now. Drop a comment and tell me about a person you almost got wrong until you didn't. Share this video with somebody who needs the reminder that a work shirt is a badge, not a verdict. And subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next story finds you, because money remembers who counted it kind. And so does everyone.